So again, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Cordell McGary. I'm with the Department of Procurement Services. Contracting Equity Division is actually specifically where I'm at. I myself and some members of our staff are involved in the administration of certification programs for small businesses, and that's going to be our topic this morning. So I know you've had, for those of you that were here earlier, probably was treated to a fantastic session by my colleague Jana, and hopefully I'll be able to kind of keep it going in that field. But glad to have you here. So we're going to get started. In the event that you guys have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to to kind of raise it as we go along. I want this to be as informal as possible for everyone to be able to participate. So that being said, let's get started. So, department overview for, again, certification is handled by the Office of Contracting Equity, a division of the Department of Procurement Services. And for those of you all who are here this morning to hear our CPO, Chief Procurement Officer Cheryl Roberts, when she gave her address, she talked about the department. Our mission statement basically is to provide opportunities and incentives and programs are designed to promote the inclusion of minorities, women, and other eligible small businesses and business opportunities or contracting opportunities for the city of Chicago. As a contracting authority, we're involved in the purchase of goods from paper clips to fire trucks. The city spends several $1 billion a year on the procurement of goods and services, and we most certainly want to try to provide opportunities for small and minority and women-owned businesses to participate in those opportunities. So we're going to talk a little bit about certification, and our goal is basically to talk about from the standpoint of the benefits of certification, qualifications for certification, the requirements, there are some differences, the application process, documents that will be needed as you go through the process, and what happens after those applications are submitted. Let me begin by basically talking about certification from the standpoint that I regard it as a tool to be used by businesses in the procurement of contracting opportunities. Being certified won't guarantee you a contract, but most certainly will enhance your opportunities to be able to participate in the contract by being certified. So we have several certification programs, 6 to be example, to be specific. I refer to them in groups of, to be named as local programs and then federal programs. Our local programs basically consist of our minority business enterprise certification, women business enterprise certification, certification for businesses owned by veterans and for people with disabilities. Those programs are, I consider local programs that are governed by local ordinance of the city of Chicago, and they have regulations that are designed to manage the programs. The other 2 programs, the DBE and ACDBE programs, which stand for Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, and also businesses that are owned and operated by people that are involved in airport concessions, are federal programs that are governed under the United States Department of Transportation federal guidelines. And so there's a separate set of regulations that govern those programs. Nevertheless, all certifications are based upon the premise of ownership and control, and of course being eligible in terms of being a minority or a woman. The benefits of certification basically that one, they provide you visibility, that all certified firms are featured in a directory that's accessible for the general public and prime contractors when there is contracting opportunities that come about. The city has a directory of local firms that are certified with the city for all of our programs. As a DBE and ACDBE, you're also listed in a statewide directory of DBE firms that are done throughout the state of Illinois. There are minority, women, veterans, and disadvantaged business participation goals on City of Chicago projects. So basically, we want to make sure that programs and contract opportunities that come about are available for participation, and we set aside goals for those activities of participation. So that, for example, in the case of, say a city wanted to spend $1 million on a particular endeavor, we want to make sure that maybe at least a portion of that $1 million gets set aside for participation by minority women-owned businesses. That could be a goal anywhere from, depending on the type of program, from maybe 5 to 20%, depending on the circumstances. It's done generally by contract. So another benefit of certification is that not only does it help you in public sector contracts, but there are also private sector businesses, like say they have social diversity programs. A lot of our hospitals, for example, have such programs. Universities have such programs. And they also seek to do business with minority and women-owned businesses. So being certified as a MBE or WBE with the city can also afford you an opportunity to participate on those contract opportunities as well. As such, certification is a tool. That's where I think it can be very beneficial for you. In addition to the other benefits that we talked about, we have a target market program where we actually set aside the entire, let's say, contract opportunity for participation by minority and women-owned businesses. And that affords you an exclusive opportunity to really, if you can, take over the entire contract opportunity. So instead of being a portion of it, let's say the goal in this case would be a full participation of 100% in some cases, as opposed to maybe the 20 or 30% or 55% goals that may be allowed in other projects. In order to qualify for certification, for purposes of the determination of being a minority or woman-owned business, or in the case of federal programs, socially and economically disadvantaged, you would need to be a member of the following groups. And that would be African American, from the standpoint of being black, those of Hispanic and Asian Indian, women, veterans, people with disabilities, and other individuals from time to time who can prove individual determination of social and economic disadvantage. For our local, I'm sorry, yes.
The last one. How do you do that?
Okay. The other one, I'll get to it. Let me just kind of explain a little bit. So when we look at the qualifying groups, for the most part, African American, black, Hispanic, Asian Indian, and women will qualify for certification under our federal programs. In addition to our local programs, we also would include veterans, people with disabilities, and the other individuals who can prove social and economic disadvantage. And what we mean by that is, let's say there's a member or an individual that wouldn't fall into any of these categories, they want to at least become certified. If they can make an individual argument that they have been subject to chronic discrimination, over a period of time that has impacted their ability to be able to participate on contract opportunities, and we can take a look at that on a case-by-case basis.
Who's overseeing that?
I'm sorry?
Who's overseeing that process?
Who's overseeing that process? In the case of the federal programs, the certification officers are charged with actually helping to make that determination. On our local programs, we do involve other groups to kind of assist us in doing that. Normally, it's generally done by our legal department. Okay. No. So with regard to veteran-owned businesses, the city began in 2017 the certification process to begin certifying veterans as veteran-owned businesses for purposes of contract participation. And we define veteran-owned business enterprises as a person who served in the United States Armed Forces and was discharged or separated under honorable conditions. We normally will require discharge forms such as a form DD-214 or DD-215 as required to support the fact that you're a veteran. In some cases, if you're certified with another agency, as a veteran-owned business enterprise, will also recognize that as a basis for qualification. Okay. Requirements of certification, we're going to talk about next. So with regard to qualifications for certification in our local programs, we define the business must be located within a certain area. It must be considered a local business where the principal place of the business is located in the counties of Cook, DuPage, Layton, Kane, McHenry, or Will. That again applies to our local programs. As a DBE or ACDBE, you can be located anywhere in the state of Illinois. Businesses must be at least 51% owned and controlled. Control also includes being managed by a member of a group that's a social group that's considered to be a minority, woman, veteran, or a person with a disability. For our federal program, the owners must be considered socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, and that would include the kind of groups that I indicated earlier.
What was that one again?
I'm sorry?
DBE, is that like disabled or something?
No, disadvantaged business enterprise.
And what disadvantage means what?
So the term disadvantage refers to people that the federal government considers to be socially and economically disadvantaged. In terms of what socially disadvantaged implies, it means that you're a member of a group that's considered to be African American, black, Hispanic, Asian Indian, and women.
So that encompasses all of that.
It encompasses those groups of individuals who are socially disadvantaged. Economically disadvantaged refers to other circumstances such as net worth, business size standard, things of that which we're going to talk about. So again, getting into the personal net worth standard, we're talking about one of the forms of economic disadvantage. Businesses are must be considered to be small in order to qualify for certification, and the owners typically should have a net worth that's within certain reasons. So for our local programs, with regard to firms that are involved in construction activities, the personal net worth of the owners, qualifying owners, should not exceed roughly 2.6 million per year. And that takes into account your personal assets minus your personal liabilities, and there are also some exclusions like as well that are taken from that, such as the value of your home, retirement accounts, as well as personal residence. So after deducting all those things, if your personal net worth is at this number, 2.689 million, you're not considered to be economically disadvantaged. That's one form of looking at it. For our local program, which is non-construction, there's a different standard. There is no personal net worth standard. So basically, there is no, you could be a billionaire in a sense. As long as you have a small business that meets size standard requirements, you can be considered for certification. Our federal programs, there's a different threshold. And that amount basically is, actually, it says 1.32 million, but that number actually was changed in May. That number is now 2.047 million. So basically, that's the net worth that you would have to be as the owner to not exceed in order to be qualified as a member of a group that's considered to be economically disadvantaged. Both numbers for the local as well as the federal programs are going to be adjusted periodically by the United States Department of Transportation for the federal programs, and the city also makes an adjustment on an annual basis for the local programs. And again, the calculation of personal net worth in all cases basically excludes the value of your primary residence and interest in your certified firm, in addition to other things such as, again, your retirement plans, savings, 401 pension, and also real estate. Another form of economic disadvantage refers to the business size. So again, the programs are all designed to work with small businesses. Now, the process of determining how the size of a business is done on let's say, based primarily on the size standards that are promulgated by the Small Business Administration. Businesses are certified by an area of specialization, what you do, and that's characterized by what's called an industry code that's done by, it's called the North American Industrial Classification System. So let's say, for example, if I was a plumber, I would be certified based upon the size standard for plumbers, which could be, let's say, 19 million as defined by the Small Business Administration. So that's kind of like the guideline for certification in terms of determination of business size standard. For the DBE program, it's the number that's reported by the Small Business Administration. So if it was 19 million for people that are involved in plumbing, that would be the business size standard for purposes of DBE certification. That would be an averaged over a 5-year period. So let's say, for example, if I've been in business since, let's say, 2010, my size standard will be based upon, let's say, the last 5 years of my gross income as reported on my tax returns, which would be, I think, the period 2018 to 2023. And the 5-year average would be determining whether or not I'm a member of a small business. And so if my 5-year average exceeds 19 million as a plumber, I would be ineligible for certification. For the ACDB program, it's a flat number. That number is 56.42 million, averaged over 5 years. And that number is determined taking into account many times the investment that many concessionaires have to make in order to get established at the airport, and the need to recoup those dollars over a period of time. For our local program, again, we have a division. We have construction firms and non-construction firms. For those firms that are involved in construction activities, then we look at this SBA size standard by that industry. We multiply it by a factor of 1.5 times and average it over 7 years. So that gives you kind of an idea of the gross sales that could be done. And that's taking into account, again, the heavy investment that many construction companies have, that they place into their business, and also the wide swings in revenues that generally are occurring as a result of construction activity going on over a 7-year period. For firms that are involved in non-construction, again, there's a flat number, and that number currently is around 46.8 million, which is, again, a flat number that applies to all firms that are not involved in construction. That number is averaged over a 3-year period. So to kind of make it simple, if I have gross sales I'm an accounting firm, and I have gross sales averaging $50 million over 3 years, I would be too large to be considered for the program. I wouldn't be considered to be a small business. So that's kind of like how we do that. Again, that's done depending on the type of business that you're involved in the industry classification. Now, we certify a number of businesses, and you can organize yourself as any form of business. We look at structures that include things from sole proprietorship to corporations. So we typically talk about business structures. In any case, we look at, again, ownership composition. So in order to be a qualified owner, you would have to at least have 51% interest in your business at all times. As a sole proprietor, you're the sole owner of the business, and typically it has no legal existence other than the fact that you're in business. So again, if I was a plumber going into business, and I just did business as Cordell, McGary, the plumber, then that would be all I need to do in order to get started. Of course, having the credentials to be a plumber, but that would all I need to do. If I'm operating in Cordell McGary as the best plumber, okay, then that requires that I have an assumed name, and I need to register that assumed name with the county in order to legally do business. So that's the simplest way to go into business. Another way to go into business that's kind of more informal is a general partnership where just two people get together and they say, hey, I'm going to, let's just do this. Let's do a plumbing company. And we have an agreement. We may have a partnership agreement that pretty much kind of defines that in writing, and that's essentially all we need. Now again, if we're doing business in a name other than, let's say, Cordell and John Plumbers, we would need an assumed name certificate in order to go along with that.
But that's the 51% still, or is it 50?
So in the case of a partnership, you can kind of structure it any way you want. I mean, if it's 50-50, I would look at the composition of the owners as well as the let's say the racial or ethnic characteristics of the owners. So again, if we're talking about getting certified, 51% of the qualified owners would need to be a minority. In the case of a partnership where they have 50-50 and they're both minorities, that's 100%. It's got to be qualified. Another form of business structure would be a corporation. That's kind of like when you're talking about probably the most common form of ownership that we look at, where you create a separate legal entity all to itself. It's not Cordell McGary the plumber. Now it's Cordell McGary Inc. Cordell McGary Inc. is different from Cordell McGary the plumber, right? It's a legal entity, and that is defined by having documents that establishes that legal entity. And you're talking about having bylaws and corporate charters filed with the Secretary of State. It establishes the entity in itself. The bylaws will also talk about basically how the business is structured, who has what titles, and how it's formed, how it raises capital, and ultimately how it would dissolve itself as well. So information that we need to kind of document that would be bylaws, your papers of incorporation that you file with the Secretary of State, stock certificates that would evidence the ownership that's held by the members of the corporation, things of that nature. And you should also have meeting minutes that pretty much document the actions taken by the corporation as opposed to the decision that might be made by the individual. And that's documented to, again, to evidence that this is a legal entity, this is what it's doing, this is how it's going about doing it. Now, some corporations are owned by one individual. And sometimes I'm running into applications where they say, well, I didn't issue any stock. I don't have any bylaws. I'm registered with the Secretary of State. Yeah, technically you're a legal entity and I have to recognize that for what that is, but I would always advise you that if you're actually going into any further with the corporation, you're probably better to formally organize it by having, let's say, minutes. Even if the minute says that Cordell met and Cordell decided that he's the president and the meeting minutes is concluded. At least something to document the existence of this entity separate from yourself. So you always want to consider that. You may not issue yourself stock certificates, but if you ever decide to bring on somebody else in the business, it's always advisable to be able to give them some evidence of their ownership, and stock certificates are one way of doing it. Another form of business structure would be more formal to the partnership would be a limited partner, where you're actually going a little bit further. You're defining, the rules of the business itself, the roles of the limited partners in the business, and you have a partnership agreement to kind of cover that. And well, certainly, again, a popular form of organization would be the LLC, or limited liability company. It's kind of like a hybrid. For me, I look at it as a hybrid between a corporation and a partnership. And it's done, I think, more for tax benefits, but basically it allows individuals to come together to organize a business that has some, let's say, some liability, not liability, but some form of protection in the form of the owners being liable to the extent of their ownership. Typically, owners are pretty much identified as members as opposed to stockholders, and you have an operating agreement that, again, determines how the business is to be structured, how it's to be run, and how it's to be dissolved. And that's in contrast to a bylaw corporation. Kind of mean the same thing, but it's for a different type of structure. And again, like corporations, the limited liability or LLC should have articles of incorporation to go along with that. In certification at our local program, we supply, or we actually certify businesses that are involved in, let's say, the supplier process, which consists of suppliers, distributors, and brokers. We draw distinctions between these three groups for purposes of eligibility. For example, we define suppliers as, let's say, a regular dealer who may actually own a store or warehouse that they actually hold inventory in, and they sell from that inventory, and they make their profits from that. Their investment in this business is in the inventory, so the risk that they take is that the inventory is not sold, and they actually can lose out on it, as opposed to maybe a distributor, which is the person that might have a relationship with a manufacturer who might be able to agree to sell that manufacturer's products or services. Usually it could be an exclusive territory, or could be in a particular area whereby the relationship a lot with that manufacturer somewhat could be, well, ideally it would be exclusive, but doesn't necessarily have to be. But your relationship with that product or good is being sold is based upon the relationship with the person that actually makes that product or service. Those two groups would be eligible for certification in our local programs as a minority or woman-owned business. Third category is called broker, and typically they are eligible for certification in our local programs, our MB and WB programs, and it's based upon the role that they play in delivering the product or service. And typically they're acting as an intermediary between whoever's available to provide them with the product, and they in turn will provide that product, access to that product to somebody else. So typically they don't really have an investment in the product other than the fact that they're just acting as a conduit between one person or another. And the money that they make is based upon any fees that they might get for doing that service. From the city standpoint, they aren't considered to be eligible for certification in that they're not considered to serve what's called a commercially useful function, and that anybody can do that. Anyone can go to, I could call up maybe XYZ magazine and say, give me 4 magazines. I can call ABC magazine and say, give me 6. I can provide those and sell those to somebody who's willing to buy them. I'm just the intermediary. I'm not providing any useful service.
Excuse me, can S-corps register as a minority-owned business?
So an S corp is considered to be a corporation. So yes, it is. But again, so I guess in terms of tax law, and there are accountants in the room that can help me out here. There are various types of corporations set up for tax purposes. I think an S corp refers to a small business that's operating as a corporation as opposed to a much larger corporate entity. And it all depends on the type of tax return form that you're filing, but you're considered to be a corporation in that way. Okay. So we kind of touched on basically the qualifications for certification, the qualifying individuals. We touched on social and economic disadvantage, the business size standard, and also the types of businesses that can apply for certification. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the application process itself. Starting in 2016, which seems like a long time ago, but yet not, the city abandoned the process of taking paper applications. So we're totally online now, everything's electronic, so you can complete the application of those supporting documents that you need. Everything is protected, it's not lost, it's not denied, it's not subject to just anyone getting the information and using it. And we use that as the process for actually completing certification eligibility for all of our programs. So applications are submitted online. The website is https://chicago.mwdee.com. That will lead you to the portal for applying for all of our programs, all 6 of our programs itself. If you're applying for certification in our local programs, which would be minority business, women-owned businesses, businesses for veterans as well, those certifications would require a $250 application, which would be assessed to you only after you submitted the application and has been reviewed and deemed to be complete for purposes of processing. So, you'll be invoiced after you submit the application for certification. Again, you can pay that $250 at any of the city's payment centers, as well as I think you can now do it online as well. For our local, I'm sorry, this one?
Does that mean the application has been accepted?
Once you've been invoiced, that means the application has been accepted for processing. So we'll talk about that. So typically, when you submit an application, you're actually answering all the questions and you're submitting supporting documents. Let's say, for example, I talked about the business size standard, right? I said, for example, that if you're in construction, you would need to provide information regarding your gross sales over a 7-year period. So typically, as part of the process, we're going to ask you for 7 years of business tax returns to be able to do that. We also ask that the tax returns be signed in order to authenticate them and make sure that they're actually what needs to be. They're actually the final returns that you submitted. That would be an example of the form of documentation that we would look for. So at the time we're looking at your application, if we have everything that we need in order for someone to begin the review of the application, then we'll receive it electronically. And then we'll invoice you for the application fee only at that time. If the application is incomplete, we will return it to you along with information that you need in order to complete the application. Make it a good form. For our federal programs, our DBE, ACDBE, yes, I'm sorry.
I have a question on the previous slide. You said that once we're invoiced, then it's approved.
Once
Okay,
it's
so
invoiced, it's actually, we received it and we invoice you for purposes of paying the application fee. Once you've paid the application fee, then it's assigned
Got it,
for
okay.
review.
Thank you
So
for the
that's
clarification.
Sorry if I didn't. Yes.
What about newly formed corporations? You had mentioned that you approved some lower tax return. What about new?
Okay, so there is no time frame that you would have to be in business in order to qualify for certification. You can be a new business and apply for certification. With regard to the request for 7 years of tax returns, if you were a construction company, you don't have them. You wouldn't have them because you didn't exist. So it kind of goes back to a mantra that I always say in order for applicants to tell the story. So basically, you would just provide a statement that says that the information is not available because I was not in existence at that time. So that's the only thing. You just need to give us an answer. If you have been in business though for 8 or 9 years, we would expect you to have this, the required tax returns. If you don't, again, you need to tell us the story. Have us understand why. I think you had a hand.
Yeah, is there, a fee per application?
For our local programs, you could, if you wanted to, let's say I'm a minority, let's say I'm a veteran, I could apply for both certifications on the same form, so there's only one fee that's needed. Let's say if I was a woman, minority, and a veteran, I could apply for all 3 certifications. Again, there's only one fee for that. And that's because there's one application. You only need to file one application for those 3. There's only need to be 3 applications.
Thank you.
Can you be approved for one and not be complete for the other? So if you apply for WB, MB, and your application is accepted, is it a possibility that one can be approved and not the other?
There's a possibility. There's a possibility. I mentioned earlier that certifications are based upon ownership and control. So one of the aspects of control basically would refer to, would relate to the service that's being provided by the business. So let's say again, I'm Cordell, McGary, the plumber, and let's say my wife is also in business with me. My background is in plumbing, hers isn't. Let's say the business is structured, and she's a minority too, by the way. And let's say the business is structured where she has 51% ownership and I have 49% ownership. So for purposes of the regulations, and we're both applying for WB and MB certification, right? So for purposes of the certifications, we're all minorities, so that's 100% ownership. For the woman's side of it, she's the owner and she has 51% ownership. So technically, it looks good on paper. However, if she doesn't have the experience in plumbing that I have, the question would be how did she control the business? Because she's dependent upon me in order to do the core function of the business. And by her not being qualified in that sense, then technically she wouldn't be eligible for certification as a woman-owned business, but would still qualify as a minority.
So should you guys change the ownership percentage? So
I smile because I really can't tell you how to structure your business, and I don't want to advise you how to structure your business because that's a business decision that you're making. You should make that decision based upon the strengths of your ownership. So if if, let's say you and your husband are forming a business and, he has the background that you don't, or you have the background of the work that's been done and he doesn't, you may want to consider that from the standpoint of, okay, if I want to qualify as both a woman-owned and a minority-owned business, then someone with experience needs to be the one that's in control of the business. That's all I have.
So if you're SBA certified, does that help you through this process at all, or do you still need to meet the local requirements? Is that
Okay, you still need to meet the local requirements. I mean, because they are unique to the area. I always say that being certified with the SBA or another agency should be helpful from the standpoint that one, you should know the certification process to begin with, so you kind of know what to expect, and also the person that's doing their review will have certain expectations too about certain aspects of the business, like do you control it, ownership composition, things like that. So it should be helpful in that sense. Yes, sir.
Did I hear you correctly about the 51% of controlling stake owner would need to be the one on the land? Is that within a partnership or is that just identical?
So let's talk about from the standpoint of a partnership. Let's say that you're an architectural firm, okay, and you have a partnership with another individual. Let's say the partnership structure is 50-50. Both members are minority. One person has the architectural background, the other one might have the administrative background needed to manage the operations of the business. The business is being certified as an architectural business, right? So basically, looking at that, I'm saying the business that right now is typically owned by minorities, and that both members are minorities, so they compromise 100% ownership. And in this case, with regard to technical abilities, at least one of those members has the background and expertise needed to manage the business operation. So that person is not necessarily dependent upon someone else to make the decisions. They're in a position to make decisions. So in that sense, that would be 50-50 arrangement should be acceptable. However, if the administrative person had 51% or 60% of that business, and the architect had 40%, that's trying to be certified as an architectural firm, the question would be, how can the person with the majority ownership control this business because they don't have the background and expertise?
Okay, so it's based on the background.
Expertise.
They would look into that as far as the background. But a man and woman 50-50%, you can get all of those certifications.
You can, as long as, again, you meet the technical expertise aspect of it. So I mean, it's much like that. We look at the businesses being owned and controlled by eligible individuals. So the eligible individual, whoever that is, whatever percentage they might have that's over 51%, they would be the ones that I would expect to have the background and skills at least enough to understand and control that aspect of the business. You don't want someone else making policy decisions for you, particularly if that person is not an eligible person. All right. Okay. So moving along on the application process, type of information that we normally will request on an application would be type of certification that you seek. Tell us the story. We need to understand basically who you are, what you do, how you do it. It's kind of like basic information that is so important. Again, we certify businesses based upon the area of expertise. So if we don't understand what it is you're doing, it's hard for us to certify someone. So, now I say kind of make it as plain as possible, if you can. I see many applications that say I add value to corporations. You don't tell me how you do it. I don't know if you're a consultant, I don't know if you're a manager, I don't know basically what it is you do. But it sounds good, right? On a resume it sounds good. But keep in mind, you're trying to make a case for certification. You're telling a story about your business, how it got started, who the ownerships are. That information may help to qualify you in terms of being in control of that business. So again, identify the type of certification that you're seeking. We have 6 different programs. If you're seeking certification under our local programs, you can apply for technically MBE, WBE, BPB, and BBE, all in one application. If we're looking to be certified under our federal programs,